On a chilly January morning in the year 2011, a 21-year-old pregnant college student named Bethany Ann Decker disappeared from her apartment in Ashburn, Virginia. No witness saw her leave. No cameras recorded her final movements. And for almost 12 years, no one knew exactly what happened inside that quiet unit on Orchard Grass Terrace. Her wallet was left behind. Her car sat abandoned. Her bank cards were never touched again. Her phone went silent. And the only digital trace of her after January 29th was a series of Facebook messages her family immediately knew were not written by her. What followed was a mystery that would stretch across states, span more than a decade, and expose a dark history of violence that had been hiding in plain sight. This is the Criminal Schema, and today we present the long-awaited, full documentary investigation into the disappearance and murder of Bethany Ann Decker. Before we begin, please remember to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the Criminal Schema for more in-depth true crime documentaries. Now, let us begin. To understand the magnitude of the loss, we must begin long before the day Bethany disappeared. Bethany Ann Decker, born on May 13, 1990, was the eldest of 3 children. Her family described her as warm, encouraging, and naturally gifted. From a young age, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that made people feel safe around her. Her laughter was easy, her smile constant. She was the kind of student who excelled without appearing to try, the kind who could write an essay the night before it was due and still earn top marks. Her mother, Kim Nelson, often said that Bethany had been smiling since the day she was born. Her younger siblings described her as their leader, someone who could walk into a room and instantly make it feel lighter. She was the type of young woman whose future seemed open with possibility. In 2008, Bethany graduated high school with honors and was accepted into George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. She chose a major in global and economic change, a rigorous program that combined economics, politics, geography, and international studies. She was ambitious, motivated, and determined to turn her education into a meaningful career. But like many young adults, Bethany's life would take unexpected turns, some beautiful, and some tragic. Bethany's freshman year at George Mason University began like many others: dorm life, new friends, late-night study sessions, and the freedom that comes with living independently for the first time. It was during this period that she met Emil Decker, a tall, polite, soft-spoken cadet in the Reserve Officer Training Corps. Emil was studying at Virginia Tech's Northern Virginia campus and preparing for service in the Army National Guard. He was described as a thoughtful romantic, a man who listened carefully and remembered even the smallest things Bethany mentioned in passing. Her family adored him. Emil blended into their gatherings as if he had always belonged. Friends remembered that he treated Bethany kindly, gently, and with deep devotion. Within a couple of years of dating, Emil proposed, and Bethany happily accepted. Shortly afterward, she discovered she was pregnant. Bethany and Emil welcomed the surprise with youthful optimism. The couple married and soon welcomed their son, Kai, into the world. Parenthood, though joyful, introduced immense pressure. Bethany was still attending George Mason University. Emil was training with the Army National Guard and preparing for deployment to Afghanistan. Their combined income was limited. Their families pitched in as much as they could. Still, the stress grew. Bethany picked up long shifts at a restaurant to help pay bills. Emil trained harder, knowing he would soon leave the country for months at a time. They loved each other deeply, but life pulled them in opposing directions. Friends later said that, despite the pressure, Bethany still found ways to smile. But privately, she confided that she felt overwhelmed and stretched thin. The couple's time together became fractured, sometimes tense, and filled with exhaustion rather than connection. By late 2010, the marriage was strained. Bethany told Emil she felt they were living in 2 completely separate worlds. Conversations grew shorter. Their paths rarely crossed. And just months before her disappearance, they mutually agreed to take a break, a temporary separation, hoping time apart might help them repair the relationship. She moved into her own apartment in Ashburn. And that is where the story takes its haunting turn. Bethany's new apartment in Ashburn placed her closer to her job, allowing her to take on more shifts and increase her income. During one of these shifts, she met a man who would change her life and ultimately end it. His name was Ronald Roldan, a 31-year-old originally from Bolivia. Co-workers described Ronald as quiet, intense, and observant. Bethany, younger and vulnerable from the strain of separation, initially saw him as a comforting presence. She told friends she was lonely with Emil, away in Afghanistan. Ronald offered attention, reassurance, and emotional presence, things she had been missing. But it did not take long for the facade to crack. Friends and family quickly grew concerned. Ronald moved into Bethany's apartment almost immediately, far too quickly for anyone's comfort. He became controlling, jealous, overbearing. He called constantly. He demanded to know where she was at all times. If she went to visit friends, he often showed up unannounced, parking outside and waiting for her to leave. Bethany confided to her best friend Sarah that she felt smothered and afraid. She told her mother she believed Ronald had harmed Kai at least once. The toddler returned home from daycare with a black eye that Ronald brushed off as a simple fall from a chair. But Bethany's family was unconvinced. More disturbing still, Ronald once called Kai's daycare pretending to be Emil, attempting to gain access to the child. The daycare workers sensed something was wrong and refused him. They later created a special verification code to prevent any further attempts. It was clear to Bethany's family that she was trapped in a dangerous, escalating situation. By the end of 2010, Bethany's mental and emotional state had deteriorated. She felt torn between her responsibilities, her failing marriage, and her increasingly volatile relationship with Ronald. To complicate matters further, she discovered she was pregnant again, and this time, the father was Ronald Roldan. Friends said she was consumed with guilt. She wanted to repair her marriage with Emil, provide stability for Kai, and escape Ronald's escalating behavior. She told her mother she needed to leave her apartment in secret or find a way to get Ronald out. Kim Nelson, her mother, quietly helped her craft a plan. They began discussing how Bethany could distance herself from Ronald safely. Despite everything, when Emil returned home on military leave in mid-January 2011, the couple agreed to take a vacation to Hawaii, a final attempt to save their marriage. Surprisingly, the trip went well. Emil later said it was the happiest they had been in months. They laughed, talked, and spent real time together, not as exhausted parents, but as young people rediscovering what had once brought them together. Emil even said that Bethany seemed lighter, as though she believed they could fix things. But when they returned from Hawaii on January 28th, reality was waiting. Bethany visited her grandmother the next day. They baked homemade pizza together, talked about the trip, and enjoyed what would unknowingly become their last day together. Bethany's grandmother later said that beneath her granddaughter's laughter, she sensed a deep sadness, as though Bethany was carrying something far heavier than she wanted to admit. Late that night, Bethany's phone began ringing repeatedly. The tone in her voice changed. She quickly gathered her belongings and rushed out, telling her grandmother and Emil that they didn't understand what was going to happen if she did not return home immediately. It was the last time anyone in her family saw her alive. On the morning of February 2nd, 2011, Emil was scheduled to fly out for his deployment. Bethany had promised she would meet him at the airport to see him off, something she had always done without fail. But that morning, when Emil arrived at the airport, he stood alone. Bethany never came. Confused, then increasingly worried, he called her phone. It rang without answer. He called her job. They reported she had not come in for several days. His concern turned to alarm. Before boarding his flight, he called Bethany's family and told them something was wrong. Over the next several days, Bethany's phone remained silent. Her social media accounts showed activity, but the messages did not sound like her. They were written in broken English, with misspellings and strange responses that Bethany would never have written. Her best friend Sarah became instantly suspicious. Her mother, Kim, was alarmed. Then the messages stopped entirely. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks without a single real word from Bethany. On February 19th, her grandparents drove to her apartment to check on her. What they found changed everything. Bethany's car was parked outside crookedly, with a flat tire. It had never been there before. Inside the apartment, everything was undisturbed. Her purse sat on a table. Her identification and bank cards were still inside. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle, no sign she had packed anything to leave. Bethany's grandparents immediately called 911 and reported her missing. The investigation into the disappearance of Bethany Ann Decker had begun. In Part 1, we examined the life of 21-year-old college student Bethany Ann Decker, her strained marriage, her turbulent relationship with Ronald Roldan, and the final days leading up to her disappearance. Now, the clock begins ticking. The moment Bethany was reported missing, Loudoun County investigators faced a race against time, a race they did not realize had already been lost. What began as a routine welfare check rapidly transformed into one of the most perplexing missing person cases in Virginia's history. This is Part 2 of the Criminal Schema's investigative documentary, The Search for Bethany. Saturday, February 19, 2011, the day Bethany's grandparents discovered her abandoned car and silent apartment. When Loudoun County Sheriff's deputies arrived, they immediately recognized that something was deeply wrong. Bethany's green Mazda sedan was parked in an odd, diagonal position. One tire was completely flat. The vehicle looked as if it had been left there suddenly or moved there later by someone other than Bethany. Her grandparents told the officers that they had never seen the car in that spot before, and neighbors reported they had not seen Bethany for weeks. Inside the apartment, deputies performed what is known as a cursory sweep, a basic interior search to check for signs of forced entry, violence, or medical emergency. They found none. There were no broken locks, no overturned furniture, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Bethany's purse, her identification, her bank cards, and her phone charger were all inside. Her bed was made. Her textbooks and notebooks sat neatly on a desk. Her shoes were in their usual place. And a rent check, dated for the beginning of February, sat undisturbed, never mailed. To investigators, this was a troubling sign. People planning to leave don't leave behind their driver's license, their debit card, and their only means of communication. Bethany had not packed clothes. She had not taken toiletries. Her suitcase was still in the closet. Everything that belonged to her, everything she needed to function, was still in her apartment. It looked less like a young woman preparing to travel or hide, and more like a young woman who had simply stopped existing in the middle of an ordinary day. When a missing persons investigation begins, one of the first steps detectives take is to establish the subject's digital life. Cell phone activity, text messages, email logins, bank card usage, social media activity, class attendance, workplace check-ins. Bethany's digital trail came to a halt on January 29th, the day she was last confirmed alive. Her phone had no activity after that date, not a single call, text, or signal ping. Her email remained dormant. Her bank accounts froze. Her ATM card was never used again. Her George Mason University login showed no sign she had accessed her student account. She did not attend any classes. She did not appear for work at the restaurant. This absence was not consistent with a voluntary disappearance, especially for a pregnant mother of a 1-year-old child. Yet bizarrely, her Facebook profile became active days after she vanished. But the posts and messages looked strange. They were spelled incorrectly. They were phrased awkwardly. And to those who knew Bethany best, they did not sound like her at all. Her best friend Sarah described the Facebook messages as, "Absolutely not, Bethany." Her mother described them as, "Wrong like a stranger was pretending to be her." Several friends noted that Bethany rarely wrote in broken English, yet the messages they received had basic errors she would never make. Detective logs later confirmed this. The mystery surrounding these messages would become one of the earliest clues in the case, though it would take nearly a decade before investigators learned the truth behind them. Once detectives secured Bethany's apartment and documented the scene, the most urgent task was to interview the last people to see her alive. There were two obvious individuals. First, her husband, Emil Decker, who was already back overseas preparing for deployment. Second, her live-in boyfriend, Ronald Roldan, who was staying in Ashburn. Interviewing Emil Decker. When detectives contacted Emil, he expressed immediate concern. He told them that Bethany had promised she would be at the airport to see him off on February 2nd, something she had never missed before, but she did not arrive. He also told them that when he tried to call her, Her phone kept going straight to voicemail. As soon as he learned she was officially missing, Emil requested emergency leave from his unit and flew home to Virginia at his own expense. Investigators later confirmed that Emil cooperated fully, answered all questions, willingly took a polygraph, provided access to his email and phone, gave detailed accounts of his whereabouts, had verifiable alibis. He described Bethany as distant and stressed in the days before her disappearance, and he admitted their marriage was strained. But he was adamant that he last saw her during their visit with her grandmother on January 29th. Investigators found no evidence contradicting his account. Interviewing Ronald Roldan. The interview with Ronald was very different. Detectives found him at his mother's house. He appeared calm, even relaxed. He told investigators that he and Bethany's relationship had recently ended. He had moved out of her apartment. He had seen her alive on the afternoon of January 29th. She had seemed normal. He assumed she had gone somewhere voluntarily. He did not notice her absence. But this account was deeply suspicious. He had been living with Bethany. He claimed they broke up. He said she left the apartment. He claimed he had no idea where she went. Yet he had made no effort to contact her afterward. Not once. Detectives quietly noted this in their logs. Even more troubling, Ronald did not seem concerned that his pregnant girlfriend had been missing for 3 weeks. His demeanor raised red flags immediately. While Ronald insisted Bethany walked out after an argument, evidence contradicted him. The workplace call. Bethany's restaurant manager reported that on the afternoon of January 29th at around 2 o'clock, Bethany called to confirm her upcoming shifts. She even confirmed she would work that evening, but she never showed up. This call placed Bethany alive the afternoon of the 29th, but her phone never made another outgoing call afterward. Ronald's cell phone data. Ronald's ATM card was used on the afternoon of the 29th. 2 messages were sent from Ronald to Bethany on that day. Yet Bethany's phone had no outgoing activity. The car. Bethany's grandparents told investigators the car outside her apartment, the one with the flat tire, had not been there days earlier when they previously drove by. That suggested someone moved it. And since Bethany apparently never used her phone, bank card, or email again, investigators questioned whether she had ever returned to her apartment at all after leaving her grandmother's home. By early March, the investigation intensified. Loudoun County Sheriff's Office held its first press conference. Bethany's young age, her pregnancy, and her total disappearance made headlines across Virginia. Search efforts. Teams of volunteers combed woodlands, fields, and streams. K-9 units sniffed the apartment complex and nearby areas. Divers searched local ponds and retention lakes. Flyers were posted in grocery stores, gas stations, and campus buildings. Still, nothing surfaced. Investigators then turned to the trash system at the Orchard Grass Terrace complex. They collected bins, sifted through debris, and searched the compactor area. No remains were found. At that time, nobody knew why. Although detectives publicly stated they had not named a suspect, internally, they began referring to Ronald Roldan as a person of interest. Not a suspect, not yet, but certainly not an innocent bystander either. Why Ronald stood out? He had a history of volatility. He had lived with Bethany. The Facebook messages didn't match her writing style. He was the last confirmed person to see her alive. He showed shockingly little concern for her disappearance. He provided vague, inconsistent statements about her final day. Still, without a body, without forensic evidence, and without witnesses, detectives lacked the one thing they needed most: a crime scene. And without a crime scene, there was no murder case. By late 2011, the leads dried up. Phone records had been analyzed. Bank statements had been reviewed. Emails subpoenaed. GPS data requested. Witnesses interviewed. Trash searched. Surrounding counties notified. But no new information came in. Bethany's family held vigils. They contacted the media. They spoke with nonprofit organizations. They pleaded with the public for help. Investigators remained committed, but the case had reached a dead end. Bethany had vanished so completely it was as if she had been erased. Slowly, painfully, the investigation settled into cold case status. Her mother, Kim, later described the experience as 12 years of waking up every day and not knowing. The silence was crushing, and for several years, the story disappeared from the headlines. But then, completely by chance, a new case, hundreds of miles away, cracked the mystery wide open. A violent attack, a burst of gunfire, a woman fighting for her life, and a name investigators already knew too well. Ronald Roldan, the man last seen with Bethany, and the man who would now reveal himself to be far more dangerous than anyone imagined. For nearly 4 years, the disappearance of Bethany Ann Decker remained locked in silence. No new evidence, no eyewitness testimony, no trace of her anywhere. But on a cold November night in the year 2014, more than 150 miles away from Ashburn, Virginia, a violent emergency call shattered the quiet. A woman was fighting for her life. Gunshots had been fired. A neighbor was screaming into the phone. The name of the attacker? Ronald Roldan, the same man who had lived with Bethany, the same man last seen with her, the same man who had remained eerily calm during interviews. Now, the truth about Ronald would begin to spill out, and with it, the long hidden shadows behind Bethany's disappearance. The date was November 12, 2014, just after 1:30 in the morning, in the quiet golf community town of Pinehurst, North Carolina. Inside a modest home on a dimly lit street, 30-year-old Vicki Willoughby sat alone in her living room. She had been dating Ronald Roldan for several months. Their relationship had started with affection, but gradually turned stormy, unstable, and frighteningly similar to what Bethany's friends had described years earlier. Vicki later recalled that evening in chilling detail. The attack. Ronald had come home agitated. His mood shifted rapidly from calm to furious in a matter of seconds. He walked behind Vicki, grabbed her by the hair, and snapped her neck in 2 places. The sound of the fracture echoed through the room. Vicki screamed. Ronald punched her repeatedly. He bit her. He tried to strangle her. She fought to stay conscious. Bruised, suffocating, bleeding. Vicki reached for a handgun she kept for protection. With trembling hands, she fired 2 shots into Ronald's chest. But Ronald did not collapse. Instead, he lunged at her, ripped the gun from her grasp, and shot her 3 times, once in the arm, once in the side, and once directly in the head. And still somehow Vicki survived. The escape. Barely able to see, Vicki crawled out of her home, dragging herself across the ground to a neighbor's house. She banged on the door until the neighbor opened it, horrified at the sight before him. He locked the door, grabbed his own firearm, called 911. Vicki collapsed on the floor, blood dripping, barely conscious. Police response. When officers arrived, they found Ronald on the ground inside the home, gasping, wounded but alive. He was taken into custody and hospitalized, but his violent outburst had finally exposed him. Police documented the scene. Blood on the carpet and walls, bullet casings scattered, signs of a vicious struggle. A trail from the living room to the yard, where Vicki escaped. This was no argument. This was an attempted murder. As detectives began interviewing Vicki, her story grew even more alarming. She told them she had always felt something dark within Ronald. A simmering rage. A sense of danger that she could not fully articulate. But one conversation she had with him stood out. One day, after watching an episode of Nancy Grace that featured the disappearance of Bethany Decker, Vicki confronted Ronald about it. She asked whether he knew Bethany. He said yes. She asked whether he had anything to do with her disappearance. Ronald's reaction terrified her. Instead of denying it, he grew agitated, then cold. Vicki said that Ronald told her, "I can make people disappear. I have done it before." She said it was not a joke, not said in passing, not said in anger. It was a threat, quiet, deliberate, purposeful. And now, as she lay in a hospital bed, missing an eye, nursing a shattered neck, trying to process the fact that she had survived being shot in the head, Vicki told detectives everything. Those words became the key that reopened Bethany's case. Back in Virginia, the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office received the report from North Carolina. The details were chilling. Ronald had attempted to kill his girlfriend. He had shot her. He had displayed extreme, escalating violence. He had made a comment about making someone disappear. And that someone clearly was Bethany. Detectives who worked the original case immediately recognized the implications. For years, investigators had suspected Ronald. Now they had proof he was capable of brutality. They had reason to believe he had confessed indirectly. They had a living victim who had escaped him. Bethany's case was suddenly alive again. Loudoun County detectives traveled to North Carolina to interview Ronald. They brought the entire case file, photos of Bethany, screenshots of Facebook messages, phone records, apartment logs, everything. But when they attempted to question him, Ronald exploded. The interrogation, detectives described him as hostile, defiant, verbally abusive, unwilling to answer questions, shouting obscenities, refusing to cooperate. He would not confirm anything about January 29, 2011. He would not discuss Bethany. He would not acknowledge the Facebook activity. He would not explain the phone silence. He would not discuss the broken-up relationship. It was the first time investigators saw Ronald drop the calm, collected persona he used when he had first spoken with police. Now he was exposed. His violence on full display. His mask cracked open. Detectives left the interrogation room convinced that Ronald Roldan was responsible for Bethany's disappearance. But they still had no body, and no physical evidence tying him directly to a homicide. They needed something stronger, something concrete, something digital, and soon that evidence arrived. Throughout the early years of the investigation, Bethany's Facebook activity was one of the biggest red flags. Friends had received messages that felt wrong. Her mother had noticed bizarre phrasing. Her best friend said the writing looked like a stranger trying to sound like Bethany. Those messages had been critical but difficult to trace definitively. Now, with renewed urgency, detectives obtained a full search warrant for Bethany's digital accounts. The breakthrough. After extensive data retrieval and analysis, investigators uncovered the truth. Bethany's Facebook account and Ronald's Facebook account were accessed repeatedly from the same IP address in the days following her disappearance. This was a turning point. It proved Ronald had access to Bethany's login information. Ronald was impersonating her on social media. Ronald was attempting to create the illusion she was alive. Ronald was controlling the narrative. This was exactly the kind of digital deception seen in cases of domestic homicide. It was a pattern, a tactic, a cover-up, and it was not the first time Ronald used deception as a tool of control. Investigators now had digital proof he had lied all along. At this point, a frightening picture emerged. Bethany, before she vanished, trapped in an abusive relationship, planning to leave Ronald, secretly preparing to move out, telling her mother she feared what would happen, pregnant with Ronald's child, exhausted and overwhelmed. Ronald's behavior, controlling, jealous, tracking Bethany, impersonating Emil at the daycare, stalking, isolating her, threatening. The disappearance timeline. Bethany returns home after visiting her grandmother. No more phone activity. No more digital evidence from her own hands. Ronald's ATM movement places him near the apartment. Ronald is the last to see her. Ronald lies about their breakup. Facebook messages appear in broken English. The later attack in North Carolina. A violent attempt to kill another girlfriend. A pattern of extreme domestic violence. A verbal threat referencing making someone disappear. Digital evidence. Same IP address. Same access point. Same login attempts. Messages not written by Bethany. Everything pointed to one man. Everything pointed to one moment. Everything pointed to one truth. Bethany did not disappear. Bethany did not run away. Bethany was not hiding. She was gone because Ronald made her disappear. In North Carolina, Ronald was convicted of his violent assault on Vicky and sentenced to a multi-year prison term. Virginia detectives saw an opportunity. While Ronald served time behind bars, investigators could continue building their case, re-examining evidence, re-interviewing witnesses, compiling digital data, obtaining new warrants, working with forensic teams, consulting experts in domestic homicide. Year after year, the file grew thicker. The case was building. Not quickly, not loudly, but it was building. And when Ronald's release from the North Carolina prison approached, Virginia prepared to make their move. On November 10, 2020, as Ronald completed his sentence in North Carolina, Loudoun County deputies waited outside. He never walked free. Instead, he was immediately taken into custody and transported back to Virginia. There, he was formally charged with abduction, later upgraded to second-degree murder. Investigators finally said publicly what they had long believed privately. Ronald Roldan had killed Bethany Ann Decker. Her body had never been found. Her remains likely lost forever. But the evidence, though circumstantial, was overwhelming. For the first time, the truth could finally begin to surface. For nearly a decade, the disappearance of 21-year-old Bethany Ann Decker lingered without resolution. Her family endured birthdays, holidays, and milestones with no answers, no closure, and no remains to lay to rest. But in late 2020, the man long suspected of harming Bethany, Ronald D. Roldan, finally stood before a judge in Virginia. What followed was a chain of legal decisions, confessions, and courtroom revelations that would expose the truth of Bethany's final moments, even without the recovery of her body. This is part 4 of the Criminal Schema's documentary investigation. The truth comes out. When Loudoun County deputies took custody of Ronald Roldan on November 10, 2020, they were prepared. Years of methodical, behind-the-scenes investigation had led to a structured plan. The charges were not filed hastily. They were not rushed. They were built brick by brick, adding weight to a case that had once been only suspicion. The initial charge: abduction. Prosecutors began with a single count of abduction, a charge they were certain they could prove. This allowed them to hold Ronald in custody legally while preparing the more complex charge that would follow. The arrest affidavit outlined key facts. Bethany vanished under suspicious circumstances. She was living with Ronald at the time. He was the last person to see her alive. He controlled her social media after January 29th. He impersonated her online to allay suspicion. He provided false and misleading statements to investigators. He had a history of violence, including a near-fatal attack. He had made statements implying he was responsible for her disappearance. The abduction charge secured Ronald's presence in Virginia. Then, just weeks later, the upgrade: second-degree murder. In December 2020, prosecutors upgraded the charge to second-degree murder. This meant the Commonwealth believed they could prove Ronald killed Bethany maliciously. He acted with intent, but without premeditation. The murder occurred in the heat of argument or rage. There was no accident, as he would later claim. He concealed the crime. He disposed of her body. He manipulated her accounts to hide the truth. He misled detectives. Though investigators still did not have a body, they had enough circumstantial and digital evidence to support the charge. And so began the long legal battle. As the case moved toward trial, the Commonwealth Attorney's Office painstakingly assembled the events of January 29, 2011. They prepared to introduce cell phone data, Facebook IP logs, ATM timestamps, witness testimony, testimony from Vicki Willoughby, daycare verification incidents, Bethany's family statements, details about her pregnancy, Ronald's previous violence, timeline inconsistencies. Defense attorneys attempted to stall the proceedings, delaying hearings several times. They argued the evidence was circumstantial. There was no body. Bethany might have left voluntarily. Ronald's statements, years later, were unreliable. But prosecutors countered with mounting facts. They emphasized that Bethany was pregnant, had a 1-year-old child she adored, had never gone more than a day without contacting family, left all belongings behind, had no reason to disappear, had been preparing to leave Ronald, was fearful for her safety. Additionally, They highlighted Ronald's pattern of abuse and control. The case was strong, but prosecutors knew that trying a no-body murder can be extremely difficult before a jury. The prosecution's risk: to convict without a body, the Commonwealth needed to meet a high burden, prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the victim is dead, and that the defendant caused that death. Though they were prepared, they also understood one truth: if Ronald were acquitted, they could never try him again for Bethany's murder. A jury trial was a gamble, a dangerous one. Thus began discussions of a plea agreement. In early 2022, both legal teams entered plea negotiations. Prosecutors wanted one thing above all else: answers. They wanted to know what happened inside the apartment, how Bethany died, where her body was placed, whether she suffered, whether she realized what was happening, whether there were any remains that could still be found. For Bethany's family, the plea negotiations were emotionally excruciating. Kim Nelson, Bethany's mother, later said she spent sleepless nights wrestling with the decision. On one hand, a plea meant answers. On the other, it meant Ronald would not serve life in prison. Kim described it as choosing between two painful outcomes. Ronald agrees to talk. Finally, under pressure, Ronald's defense team indicated he would accept a plea deal if prosecutors would cap his prison sentence. The Commonwealth agreed, but with strict conditions. Ronald must provide a truthful, complete account of what happened to Bethany. This included how she died, what he did with her body, what he did afterward. If he lied, the deal would be void. In late 2022, Ronald sat down with detectives for a recorded interview. What he said was chilling, but predictable. He claimed he and Bethany argued on January 29th. She became upset. He shoved her. She fell backward. Her head struck a windowsill. She died instantly. This was his version of events. A single shove, an accidental fall, instant death. Detectives listened carefully, but they did not believe him. Why his story didn't match reality. There were several problems with Ronald's account. Bethany had no documented history of head trauma before she vanished. The alleged windowsill was too low to cause such catastrophic injury. An instant death from a fall is statistically unlikely. He offered no explanation for why he disposed of her body instead of calling 911. He lied about her Facebook activity for years. He lied to family and police. He staged messages to mislead investigators. Still, the confession served its purpose. Ronald admitted he caused Bethany's death, and for the first time, the public finally learned what Ronald claimed happened next: the disposal. Ronald said he wrapped Bethany's body in a large plastic bag, dragged her to the apartment building's trash chute, forced her body inside, allowed the compactor to crush and conceal her remains, went about his day afterward. He offered no remorse, no apology, no acknowledgement of Bethany's unborn child. To detectives, it was one of the coldest acts they had encountered. On November 17, 2022, Ronald appeared in court to enter his plea. The courtroom was silent as he stood before the judge. Bethany's family filled the benches. Her mother, Kim, her stepfather, relatives, friends, supporters from advocacy groups. The charge: second-degree murder. The plea: guilty. The judge accepted the plea agreement. But Ronald did not make a statement. He did not look at the family. He remained emotionless, the same cold exterior he had worn for years. The sentencing date set. Sentencing was scheduled for February 21, 2023. It would be the day Bethany's family had waited for more than a decade. The courtroom was full again. Reporters lined the back wall. Kim Nelson clutched a framed photograph of her daughter. As the judge prepared to sentence Ronald, the Commonwealth attorneys summarized the case. Bethany had been young, bright, and hopeful. She had been pregnant with her second child. She had been trapped in a controlling, violent relationship. She had been planning to escape. Ronald killed her. Ronald disposed of her. Ronald pretended to be her online. Ronald misled everyone for years. And then The prosecution delivered the line that brought many in the courtroom to tears. She died in his hands. The sentence the judge imposed, 40 years in prison, with all but 12.5 years suspended. This meant Ronald would serve 12.5 years incarcerated, followed by 5 years of strict supervision. For a murder and the disappearance of her unborn child, it was a sentence many saw as far too lenient. But it was a sentence that gave the family answers. And it was a sentence that kept Ronald behind bars. Outside the courthouse, Kim Nelson addressed the media. Her voice shook, but her words were strong. She said she was thankful for closure. She forgave Ronald, but would never forget what he did. She hoped no family would ever endure what hers did. She missed her daughter every day. She promised to keep Bethany's memory alive. Kim then shared something heartbreaking. The night before Bethany died, Bethany had called her. She had said one simple sentence, "Mom, I love you." It was the last thing she ever said to her mother. Though Bethany's remains have never been found, her story lives on. Kim Nelson became involved with Help Save the Next Girl, a nonprofit started by the parents of another murdered young woman, Morgan Harrington. Kim now speaks publicly about domestic violence, relationship red flags, safety awareness, the importance of speaking out, the silent struggles many young women face. Every year, on Bethany's birthday, May 13th, her family lights candles and shares stories. They celebrate her life rather than her death. Her son Kai, now a teenager, is growing into a young man with the support of his father, Emil, and extended family. He carries his mother's memory in the stories he has been told. And for those who knew Bethany, her smile, her warmth, and her optimism are remembered more vividly than the darkness of her final moments. For 4 episodes, we have followed the life, disappearance, investigation, and eventual murder conviction surrounding 21-year-old Bethany Ann Decker, a mother, a student, a daughter, a sister, a friend. Now, in this final part of our documentary, we examine the deeper meaning of Bethany's case, what investigators learned, what her family advocates for today, and why her story continues to resonate across organizations dedicated to helping young women stay safe. This is Part 5 of the Criminal Schema's investigative documentary, Never Forgotten. Never Forgotten. Although Ronald Roldan pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in 2022, Bethany's case remains technically open in one devastating respect. Her remains have never been found. Loudoun County investigators have stated publicly that they believe Bethany is deceased. Her body was placed in the apartment complex's trash system. The compactor likely destroyed evidence. The contents were hauled to a landfill now impossible to search. Her remains may never be recovered. Detectives continue to hold out hope that one day, through land development, excavation, or environmental shifts, part of Bethany's remains might be discovered. But realistically, they know the chances are slim. Why police still study the case. Even after the conviction, the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office reviews historical domestic violence patterns, the timeline of her disappearance, communication breakdowns, the behaviors exhibited by Ronald, the signs Bethany displayed, how red flags escalated, law enforcement responses. Bethany's case has become a training reference for new investigators in the county. Young detectives are taught how to spot patterns of coercive control, why abusers often escalate abruptly, how digital footprints can reveal deception, why victims may struggle to leave, how perpetrators manipulate technology, the importance of documenting partner violence. Bethany's story is not only a tragedy, it is a tool used to prevent future tragedies. To understand what happened to Bethany, one must understand a difficult truth. Most intimate partner homicides are not sudden. They are the end result of long-standing patterns. Criminologists describe a cycle. Phase 1, the idealization phase. The abuser appears, loving, attentive, available, comforting, supportive. This phase is meant to draw the victim in. Phase 2, the isolation phase. Slowly, the abuser begins to question the victim's relationships, limit their independence, discourage contact with friends and family. Monitor their movements. The victim becomes emotionally dependent. Phase 3. The control phase. The abuser escalates. Frequent calls. Demands for accountability. Jealousy. Anger. Coercive control. Emotional manipulation. Bethany's loved ones recall this stage in detail. Ronald called constantly. He wanted to know where she was every hour. He followed her to friends' houses. He waited outside. He impersonated Emil at the daycare. He installed tracking software. He monitored her. These are textbook signs. Phase 4, the trigger event. This could be a breakup, a pregnancy, a move, a confrontation, the victim trying to leave. Research shows the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship is the moment the victim attempts to escape. Bethany was planning to leave Ronald. She told her mother. She told her grandmother. She told her friends. She confided that she was developing a plan. This was the trigger. Phase 5, the final act. In many cases, the abuser kills the victim during or after an argument that is often instigated by fear of losing control. According to Ronald's own words, he and Bethany argued on January 29th. What followed was irreversible. Bethany's case is solved legally, but emotionally and historically, there remain questions that will never receive definitive answers. 1. What exactly happened in the apartment? Ronald claims he pushed her, and she died instantly from hitting her head. Investigators and forensic experts doubt this. They believe the injury described is unlikely. His account contradicts common accident patterns. He minimized his actions. He left out details to avoid further charges. Did Bethany suffer? We do not know. Her family fears she did. Investigators cannot say. Why did he not call 911? Because Ronald was not telling the truth about an accident. If Bethany had truly fallen and died, a rational person calls emergency services. A rational person performs CPR. A rational person contacts loved ones. Instead, he wrapped her in plastic, disposed of her body, used her Facebook account, pretended she was alive. This behavior aligns with intentional concealment, not panic. Where exactly is she? Even with Ronald's statement, investigators do not know where the landfill material ended up inside the massive dump site. It is comparable to searching for a single grain of sand in an ocean. What happened to her unborn child? The saddest truth is that Bethany was 5 months pregnant. A second life was lost, that day a child who never had a name, a birthday, or a chance. The law could not charge Ronald with the death of the unborn child without specific remains or medical confirmation, which were impossible to obtain. But to Bethany's family, they lost 2 souls that day. After losing her daughter, Kim Nelson could have retreated from public life, overwhelmed by grief. Instead, she chose to fight back through awareness, advocacy, and education. Kim became involved with the organization, Help Save the Next Girl, founded by the parents of Morgan Harrington, another Virginia college student murdered in 2009. This organization focuses on promoting safety for young women, raising awareness of predatory behavior, educating the public on domestic violence, strengthening community action, offering resources to vulnerable individuals, creating vigilance among students and families. Kim's message. Kim speaks at colleges, high school events, and community meetings. Her message is consistent. Always trust your instincts. Leave relationships that make you feel unsafe. Tell someone about red flags. Take missing persons seriously. Protect young women by educating them early. Never assume it can't happen to us. Kim often says, "The last thing Bethany ever said to me was, 'Mom, I love you. I don't want any other mother to lose her child without warning.'" Law enforcement officers often say that certain cases stay with them forever. Bethany's case is one of them. Detectives who worked on it for more than a decade describe the heartbreak of having no body, the frustration of circumstantial evidence, the agony of watching a family wait for answers, the helplessness of watching time slip away, the determination to never give up. Bethany's disappearance shaped training academies, protocols for domestic violence cases, legal procedures for cyber investigation, awareness programs on coercive control, the impact on digital investigations. One of the most groundbreaking aspects of Bethany's case was the role of digital footprints. Her Facebook impersonation became a pattern recognizable to modern investigators. Evidence used in the murder charge, a key demonstration of post-crime manipulation. Today, many cold cases and missing person cases use Bethany's digital timeline as an investigative model. Bethany's story underscores a painful truth. Most victims of intimate partner homicide show signs long before the crime. Those signs include sudden isolation, controlling behaviors, surveillance, emotional volatility, jealousy, threats, attempts to impersonate or access accounts, following or monitoring. Is financial control. Experts warn that these behaviors escalate. Bethany's case shows how quickly escalation can become deadly, what friends and family can do. If you see someone becoming isolated, showing fear of their partner, hiding their phone, withdrawing socially, showing unexplained bruises, changing behavior dramatically, speak up, offer help. Do not wait. What victims should know: you are not alone. There are resources, including domestic violence hotlines, shelters, advocates, counselors, law enforcement agencies, protective orders, student support services. Bethany's story reminds us not to minimize fear. If you feel unsafe, seek help. Bethany Ann Decker was 21 years old, a college student, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a young woman filled with hope. She loved cooking nights with friends. She loved music. She loved school. She loved travel. Most of all, she loved her son, Kai. Her smile, her warmth, and her kindness remain in the hearts of those who knew her. Though Ronald tried to erase her, Bethany's story continues to protect others through her family's strength, her community's awareness, and the organizations that now fight in her honor. Bethany is gone, but she is not forgotten. Not today. Not ever. This concludes the Criminal Schema's full 5-part documentary investigation into the disappearance and murder of Bethany Ann Decker. If this story moved you, if you learned something, if you believe these cases should never be forgotten, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, subscribe to the Criminal Schema, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next true crime investigation. Your support helps us continue bringing awareness to cases that matter. Thank you for watching. And to Bethany, may she rest in peace.